was 17, I ran away from home and from everything I had ever known. I was sick and tired, living in a town filled with narrow minds and hate. They used to laugh at me, their children called me names. I would run and hide, feeling so ashamed just for being born. I was just a boy, punished for a crime that was not mine. Life ain't so easy when you're...
Hello, 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 and thank you so much for tuning in to A Spoonful of Comfort. I am Claudrine Jackson, your host for A Spoonful of Comfort, reminding you and me that in these troubled times, we need to give comfort. And if we can't give comfort, at least don't give discomfort. And a spoonful of comfort is the minimum amount of comfort to give, so everybody has a spoonful of comfort. I am Claudrine Jackson, your host for A Spoonful of Comfort, and I'm very honored to have a very special guest here today. He is a fellow writer, and he is the author of God's Child. And we are going to discuss God's Child and find out a little more about my special guest. His name is Terrence Stephen Lake. Thank you for being a guest on this show.
And thank you for having me.
So let's talk about God's Child some.
Yes.
How did you come up with the title? Why did you write it? You know, what were your processes? Now, I knew that it was written a long time ago.
Yes.
So will you tell us how you came about?
Okay, I worked at Champion Spark Plug, and one day at work, there was a friend of mine. He came up to me and he asked me, did I have a master plan? And I say, a master plan? He said, yes, a master plan. I said, well, you know, I got a lot of ideals that I'd like to bring to society. I grew up in Hamtramck, and my growing up was like the whole world was in Hamtramck. You had 70% Polish, it was 25% blacks, and it was about 5% all others. And I wanted to do something like a movie showing how we all got along, and it was such a beautiful environment. We had our own little world. Detroit was like another world. And I told him that this is what I would like to do. And he said, well, there's a guy up front, and he's trying to get some blacks to have a master plan, something that Champion Spark Plug could invest in. Now, Champion Spark Plug at the time invested $1 million into racing, auto racing, and they hadn't done anything for blacks. So this was an opportunity for him to get the inside of Champion to promote some black venture. And so we talked about it, you know, when my friend took me up front to the black industrial relations guy, and I explained to him about my ideals of doing a motion picture and having Champion sponsor it. So he decided, okay, well, you know, I'll take this ideal to the corporate headquarters and explain to them what you want to do, and I'll get back with you. And it was about a week later, my friend got me again, the worker, Warren Reeser, and we went up front to talk with Mitch Maples. He was the black industrial relations guy at Champion Spark Plug. And he said that, well, the corporate said that you had some beautiful ideals, but we need more than just ideals. We need a book. Can you write a book? Well, I thought and I hesitated and I said, a book, you know, English was sort of one of my worst subjects, but I say, if that's what it takes to get a motion picture, I'll write the book. He said, well, that's good. He said, okay, and we left that day and we went back to our jobs in the plant, and it was about maybe 2 weeks later, he called us up there and he said, how's things going? I said, well, you know, I'm really getting started, you know, and everything. And I had a question for him. I had been working, not really working, but what's the perfect word? Stage fright. But the book that I was going to do, Stage fright again.
Well, right now, explain to us how you came up with the title
Okay.
and the artwork on the cover.
Yes, okay. The title came when I started writing the book, and I needed a title because I was almost through writing the book. And I thought, wow, no one knows who I am, what type of title would I have on a book talking about my life? And when I said that, God spoke to my spirit and said, God's Child. And I thought, wow, that would be a great title, because that's everybody's title. So I decided, okay, that would be the title. And then coming up with the cover of the book, I was always watching the stars at night, and I had this vision. One time I had a dream that there were 4 moons outside my back porch, that I woke up in this dream and went to the back porch, and I looked out and seen these moons, and I said, wow, and I thought that would be beautiful for a cover, a picture of, our solar system with, the various planets that I had been studying. And that's where I came up with the cover of the book, because a lot of people, they understand that we live in the universe, but sometimes when you explain it to them, they don't see it visually. So visually, I designed the cover so people would be able to see Earth in the middle of the cover, and the universe in the background, the solar system, our solar system, part of our planets, but not all of them, because I studied at first with the naked eye until I got a telescope.
Right.
And then I started visualizing other planets.
Well, in reading the book about your life, there were so many typical experiences of young black men in the city of Detroit, and your work experience. There were so many typical things that it's amazing that from that kind of background, you developed into the person that you are, such a deep thinker, philosopher.
Yes.
And wanted to share that with us. So I greatly appreciate that. You have some ideas in the book that are unique, as referring to God as she. Could you explain that?
Oh, absolutely. I have 4 daughters and I have 1 son. And as they grew as children, I observed them, and I noticed that my daughters were very progressive. They were a little bit more progressive than my son, but they were all smart kids.
Right.
But it was just something about women. And then through life, you look at society, how women have always been held down, and when man refers to God, he always say he. And I thought, what about she? God is a spirit. How can you say God he when it could be she? And women are closer to God, in my opinion, because they bring life into the world. So that's where I came with the ideal she, just controversy to combat the he, the man saying God he. And God is a spirit, not a person, not a male or a female. God is a spirit that is in us all.
Well, I greatly appreciate that. You gave us a lot to think about. And one of the things that I realized reading your book is that you have a great appreciation for nature and the beauty of nature, and a great appreciation for family. Those are the 2 of the things that came across in that book. And one of the things about nature is you had a suggestion somewhere in the book that it would be nice if we could work for 6 months of the year and then spend 6 months traveling and educating our children to the beauty of nature. I thought that was such a great idea.
Thank you, thank you. And that's very important, because we created time. When you look on planet Earth, and we've got 24 hours and 1 revolution, where you go to other planets and they might have 12 or they might have 36 hours, So we created that time, so we have the time to do a lot of things, And if we just concentrate on getting what am I trying to say? That's a deep subject. If we concentrate on just trying to show that we can spend more time with our children and working not all our lives, maybe half our lives, and spending the other time just devoting it to living instead of working until you die. And that's why I came up with that theory of the, working half your life, and spending the other time, or working 6 months out of the year, and in the other 6 months, just enjoying life, not where you got the money to travel and all, but I also mentioned that you'd have 2 months bare minimum vacation time to go in other parts of the planet and explore other countries and other cultures, because it's very important.
And I definitely agree with that, and because I love to travel, and I appreciate the beauty of nature. And you mentioned a location in northern Michigan where you walked and you saw this beautiful view.
Yes.
And I forget what the name of the hill was that you said.
Lumberman's Monument.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
And it's so nice to know that a man can appreciate those kinds of things too. That's what I greatly appreciated. But should we get into some of your teenage history of the problems that you got into when you were a teenager?
Yes, I did have some trials and tribulations, and it started out in high school. I was in the 11th grade. I was going to 12th, and that summer I went to the State Fairgrounds with my cousin, and I went to see Martha and the Vandellas perform Heat Wave and a few other songs. And after that concert, it was at the Teenage Fair where it was mostly teenagers there. My cousin and I, we walked around through the fairgrounds, and there was a couple white girls, and they were looking in the mirror, seeing that all the makeup was in place. And I made a comment, you look good, you don't need that mirror, I said. And they smiled and they acknowledged it, so then we walked on from there, maybe about 10 paces, and then I got surrounded, me and my cousin, by about 15 white guys. And one had his arm in a sling, a bandage like, and in the other hand he had a paint stick, and he asked me, "Do you want to be an Indian?" And I said, "Man, get out of my face." I said, "Do you want to be an Indian?" And he looked like he was going to just take this paint stick and put it on me. And I knew we were surrounded, so when he raised it up, I hit him, and I just broke through the crowd, and I'd seen this one Mexican guy sort of in the back, and I made sure I wasn't going that way because he had a knife in his hand. So I seen a group of blacks, and I ran over towards where they were at. And when I got over there, the whites had followed, and someone threw a bottle in the crowd, and then everything just broke out, and everyone started fighting. And then all of a sudden the mounted police came in, and they rode down on me and hit me in the head with a club, broke the club over my head, and he jumped off the horse. I had fell to the ground, and as I was getting up, he handcuffed me. Blood was streaming all down my face, and they took me through the crowd. But actually, when he got off the horse, it seemed like everybody stopped. All the fighting just stopped. And he took me through the crowd. I was bleeding. I was mad, upset, and took me to the back area of the fairgrounds. And this is where they took me into a room, and he told me to sit down. And I didn't want to sit down. I was mad and I was upset. And then he pushed me, and then he pushed me into a wall and put his knee up against my back. And, I can go on and on about that story.
But is that when you were accused of starting a riot?
Yes, because actually after they took me to that room, they called a squad car, and they took me to Receiving Hospital, and I was had them stitch my head and everything. And after that, they took me back to the jail on 7 Mile and Woodward, and I spent the night, and my mother came the next day to get me out because my cousin that was with me, he had gotten away somehow, and he told my mother, and when she came and got me, I was on the way home, she said, "Well, you made the front paper,
Oh.
And that's when it was said that I started a riot, and I said that was wrong. I was explaining to my mother that I didn't start a riot. I said they started the riot, and I was abused by the police.
Now, that was one of the memorable incidents from your youth. What about the time you were shot in the face?
Oh, that's another situation where, some friends, we were getting together to go out to River Rouge because we had met some girls at a football game in Hamtramck. And I picked up a friend of mine, and we went to another friend's house. His name was Marty, and me and Michael were at his house, and he had to leave the house to go and get some clothes out of the cleaner, so he told us to wait. And while we were there waiting, Marty's brother, Maurice, he came into the room, and I had my hair in rollers, but I had a hat over it. And he said, "Let me see your hair." And I say, "No, it's in rollers, I don't want to, take it off." He said, "I said, let me see your hair." Now, he's 2 years younger than me, so I thought he would have just walked away, and I took my eyes off him, but all of a sudden he tried to snatch my hat, and, he scratched me in the face. So I just grabbed him, and I tussled him, and I held him down on the ground, and before you know it, Marty had came in, he seen me on top of his brother, and he jumped on me. So me and him started wrestling, and then his brother went into his father's room and came out with a gun. So Michael, my other friend, we're all friends, so he took the gun from Maurice. And then when he took the gun, I decided to leave, so I ran out of the house, and Marty followed me, and then as I got down the street, I seen Marty coming at me, and I went over to my car where I had a baseball bat, and I was getting it out, and then I seen Maurice coming with the gun again, so I ran, and Maurice jumped on my car and tried to kick my window out, and he ended up kicking the side window out, and then I seen Marty's father's car, so I went and I knocked one of his windows out, and then Maurice came with the gun again, and I ran down the street. Marty came after me, and I hit him with the bat, and then I just threw my keys to Michael and told him, drive my car to my house, and I ran all the way home. Now, this is in Hamtramck, and Hamtramck is just a 2-square-mile area, and it wasn't far for me to go home, but he came with the car to my house, and then when I was at the house, we were sitting there talking, and a car came in front of the house, and it was Marty with a carload of guys, and one of them seen me, and he said, "Oh, that's Terry." So the car pulled off, so it must have been some people that knew me and that, just didn't want to have any trouble to do with me, and that's what happened in that. It's a little bit more to it.
Well, it's amazing that you had those kind of experiences, which, are they typical of young people young men in the city?
Well,
in the area. You were in Hamtramck.
Yes.
But yes.
Well, every neighborhood has a group of guys and your friends, and if someone messes with one, you're messing with all of them.
Okay. So now you went from that to being the deep thinker about our origins of human beings. So could you tell us your theory about us coming from different planets?
Okay. Now, my philosophy of life is that we were created somewhere else in the universe, and we got advanced. Now, when I grew up in Hamtramck, I was taught that there were 3 groups of people, okay? And it was the Caucasian, the Mongoloid, and the Negroid. And they were put on planet Earth. And so my theory is, okay, if you got the 3 groups and we were put on planet Earth, where do we come from? So we came from somewhere outside of the solar system, because we know that Earth is the only planet that inhabits life, So if we weren't on planet Earth at one time, we had to come to planet Earth.
Yes.
So when we came to planet Earth at different times, well, let me go back because it's so much to that story. But living on other planets, we got advanced, and we made contact with another group. Say the Caucasian traveled and met up with the blacks on a planet, and we had religious differences, and sort of there was confusion, so we started fighting. And then in order for us to survive, we decided not to destroy the world, that we should just take a group of people and put them on Earth. And the Chinese, they had a group of people, and they were brought to Earth. And we were put on Earth. As far as blacks, we were the first ones that were put on Earth, because we know our history is the oldest history on the planet. And the Mongoloid, which is your Chinese, they were the second oldest group. But then our Caucasian brothers, they were the last ones to come to planet Earth, because when they came here, they knew they came from another planet. And when they came here, they were like soldiers. They grouped together and they started exploring, and they came into Africa and they seen Africans, and they were like, wow, you know. So they came, they communicated with us, and at one time there were some of them that tried to take over Africa, but they couldn't because the Africans were too strong. So the Caucasian went back into Europe. Now, this wasn't all the Caucasians, but it was a group of them. And then when they regrouped and they got themselves together, they came back and they did take over South Africa. And that's a known fact, you know. But then I get into the history of how we traveled on the planet,
Right.
how the Caucasian went up into Europe, or he had, the stronghold was Rome, and then from Rome they had problems fighting each other, so they went into France, and then they had problems fighting each other. Then they went to England, and they had problems, but England at one time sort of ruled the world because they said that the sun will never set on the British Empire. Right. So then they decided to send people over to North America. And when they came to North America, they seen that the Indians were there. So the Indians accepted them, they greeted them, they educated them on culture, on farming, and so many other things that they learned from. But when the Caucasian that came there, some of them went back to England to report what they had found in America. There were other individuals that had a different ideal, that they wanted to take this land over. So when they came back, they were in force, and so they actually moved the Indians into a certain area, and they sort of conquered North America. And then there was some of the whites that knew Africa had a bunch of blacks, and they had already taken over sort of South Africa, so they decided to get some slaves from Africa and bring them to the New World, which was North America, and decided to help them further their conquest and their agriculture and their economy to build it up, you know. And they used the blacks, but then getting into, everyone knows history, how slavery had an impact, and then we had the Civil War, and then the blacks were given their freedom to fight the South, you know, so that they could become free. And, you know, it goes up into World War II, where we were fighting other nations, you know. I explain all this in the book, but in a chronological order,
Right.
more so than talking.
Now, one of the things that I wanted to ask you is about heaven. Your philosophy about heaven. Do we have to die to go there?
Well, I feel you don't have to die to go to heaven, because heaven can be on earth, and the Bible says it will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. So heaven can be here, a heavenly environment. I mean, you're going to die. Everybody's going to die. But that other heaven, when we leave here, is something that we truly don't understand, but we know we all have to go. And that's what's fair about life. Everybody's got to leave. But the heaven that I'm talking about on earth is something that we create. We make a heavenly environment where it's just, you know, peaceful and heavenly.
And you said that we were put here on earth to solve our religious differences. Why did you say that?
Well, because in all societies, even when blacks were first put in Africa, they had one big family, and there was a chief, and he had children, and as he got old, he had to hand the mantle down to one of the grandchildren probably, and if he handed it to the wrong one, then part of that tribe would break up, because a stronger grandson would have influence on a lot of his friends and cousins,
Right.
and they would go off into another area and create their own dynasty. But after maybe 100 years or so, it happened where they met their kin and they fought. But then they would branch off again, and then in that dynasty, it would pass this mantle down, and then you would still have a division. And if you look at Africa today, there are many divisions. There's probably about 400 different languages.
But your main philosophy now is that we should try to learn how to live together in peace.
Yes, that's why I came up with the title, you know, when God told me God's child, that's everybody's title.
And people who have seen the show before know that I have a son with a handicap, and when I was having so much trouble adjusting to his situation, that came to me. He is God's child.
Yes.
And that was one of the ways that I was able to adjust to my son. Now, can you tell us how we can go about getting the book, God's Child?
Yes, the book is been reprinted. At first, it was printed in 1975 by one of the world's largest publishing companies, Vantage Press, and it was under contract for 2 years, and they terminated it. And then I was involved in a class action lawsuit for 25 years, and we won, and I got my money back out of it, but I didn't get what I could have got, okay? So now I republished the book, and now it's through Lulu Publishing, and for those that would like to purchase it, it would be cheaper to get it from your local bookstore because you wouldn't have to pay for the shipping. Now, the book, Amazon carry it, Kindle has it, you know, the publishing company have it, and people that know me know I keep so many on hand to give out autographed copies.
And the name of the book, again, is God's Child, and the author is Terrence Lake. So if you decide you want a copy of it, it's a very interesting book. And now Mr. Lake is going to give us a special presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to sing Imagine by John Lennon. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Maybe someday you will join us, and the world will live as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Maybe someday you will join us, and the world will be as one.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for all your information today. Thank you, our watching audience, for tuning in to A Spoonful of Comfort. Hopefully you saw something or heard something today that helps you. And please tune in every Tuesday at 1:30 on WHPR for A Spoonful of Comfort.
When I was 17, I ran away from home and from everything I had ever known. I was sick and tired